How is Jack Budkowski related?
Jack's father, Budkowski, was the brother of my grandmother, my father's mother. My father's mother's maiden name was Budkowski. Jack's father was the brother of my grandmother. No, Jack's mother was the sister of my grandfather. Jack's mother's maiden name was Lesh. So a brother and a sister of the same family married a brother and sister of another family. And that's why Jack's mother's maiden name was Lesh, and my grandmother's maiden name was Budkowski. And so my father and Jack are first cousins. So Jack is my second cousin, more like my brother, though.
And how is he related to me?
Your third cousin. And so that's how that's related. Now, I think I was going to tell you about how Jack wound up in Chicago. It's a very bizarre story. Truth is stranger than fiction. Jack and two of his friends came to the United States from a DP camp in Germany. DP is a displaced persons camp. After the war, they took survivors from all over and they put them in a camp. And then they were going to decide what to do with it. Well, a Jewish organization, HIAS, wasn't it, Betty?
Yeah.
Paid for Jack and these two friends of his, were also camp survivors, to come to the United States. And so they did. This was like in 1947 or 48.
Did they have come to Ellis Island?
Sure, everybody had to come through Ellis Island. So,
Lock it, Scotty.
lock it, push that button up. So the three of these fellows came to New York. And at one point, Jack got a job painting water towers. You know what a water tower? Because nobody wanted to climb up and paint it. But Jack would have done anything to make a buck to live on, because they didn't get government assistance or help or food stamps. Here you are, take care of yourself. So one day, the three friends, buddies, decided they wanted to sightsee and see the Statue of Liberty. So they got in a cab, the three of them, and went to see up from a viewpoint the Statue of Liberty. They couldn't speak English, they only spoke Yiddish or Polish. Jack spoke German, but anyhow, they all spoke Yiddish. And so three of them were sitting in the back of the cab and talking in Yiddish. What a wonderful view and how wonderful it is. And so one of the three fellows said something to Jack in Yiddish and called him by his name, Budkowski. And lo and behold, the cab driver was just sitting in the front of the cab through all their conversation. And the cab driver turns around and talks to the three of them in Yiddish. The cab driver is Jewish too. In those days, most of the cab drivers in New York City were Jews, immigrant Jews. Now they're Pakistanis or whatever, you know. So the three guys were amazed. He's talking in Yiddish. And he says, I heard you say something about Budkowski. He says, my cousin's wife's name, her maiden name was Budkowski. So Jack says, really? He says, where do they live? What's the husband's name? He says, Sam Lesh. He says, my mother was a Lesh. He says, well, I'm Sam Lesh's cousin. The cab driver calls him.
That's how I got here.
He says, really? He says, where is he? He says, he's in Chicago. I'll give you his number. And this Jack calls or writes to my grandfather and tells him he's Jack Budkowski. So my grandfather says, what are you doing in New York? He says, I don't know. Don't know where to go. He says, come to Chicago and you'll live with us. Came to Chicago and he moved in with my grandparents.
Wow.
Amazing.
Isn't that
Unbelievable.
What are the odds?
Yeah.